Mao Zedong was the principal founder of the People's Republic of China, which he ruled from its establishment in 1949 until his death. His political and military leadership transformed the country into a major world power. Mao's health declined significantly in his later years. He was a lifelong heavy smoker, which contributed to severe lung and heart problems. In his final year, he suffered multiple heart attacks. He passed away in Beijing on September 9, 1976. His death triggered a power struggle within the Communist Party. Contrary to his wish to be cremated, the party leadership decided that his body should be preserved for posterity. His remains were embalmed, a process overseen by a team of Chinese scientists. His final resting place is the Chairman Mao Memorial Hall, commonly known as the Mausoleum of Mao Zedong. This massive, imposing structure stands in the heart of Beijing on Tiananmen Square. Constructed in just under a year, inside, Mao's body lies in a temperature-controlled crystal coffin, draped with the flag of the Communist Party of China. Visitors file through in a solemn and strictly organized procession to view the preserved remains of the man known as the Great Helmsman. Adolf Hitler was the leader of the Nazi Party and the dictator of Germany from 1933 to 1945. His aggressive foreign policy led to the outbreak of the Second World War, and his regime was responsible for the Holocaust, the genocide of about 6 million Jews and millions of other victims as the Battle of Berlin raged and Soviet forces closed in on the capital. Hitler knew the end was near. On April 30, 1945, just 2 days after his ally Benito Mussolini was executed, Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. He died by a self-inflicted gunshot to the head, while his wife of one day, Eva Braun, died by ingesting cyanide. Following Hitler's prior instructions, their bodies were carried up to the Chancellery garden, doused with gasoline, and set ablaze. Because of this, Adolf Hitler has no grave. The Soviets discovered the charred and incomplete remains a few days later. For decades, Soviet intelligence agencies secretly buried and exhumed the remains at various locations in East Germany. Fearing a grave could become a shrine for neo-Nazis, the KGB director in 1970 ordered a final operation. The last known remains were completely cremated, and the ashes were unceremoniously scattered into a tributary of the Elbe River. The exact location was never revealed, ensuring that no physical trace of Hitler's final resting place would ever exist. Indira Gandhi was the third Prime Minister of India and a dominant figure in the Indian National Congress Party. She was the daughter of India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and served as Prime Minister for 3 consecutive terms from 1966 to 1970 and a 4th term from 1980 until her death. Final term was marked by significant political turmoil. On October 31, 1984, she was assassinated at her residence in New Delhi. The assassins were 2 of her own Sikh bodyguards, who sought revenge for her military operation, Operation Blue Star. The operation involved storming the Golden Temple, the most sacred shrine for Sikhs, to remove Sikh separatists who had taken refuge there. The event had deeply offended many in the Sikh community. Following her death, her body was taken to a site near the Rajghat, the memorial for Mahatma Gandhi. In accordance with Hindu tradition, Indira Gandhi was cremated on a sandalwood pyre. The site where her cremation took place is now a memorial known as Shakti, which translates to place of strength. The memorial is a large, low platform made of solid reddish-gray stone, situated in the middle of a vast, tranquil lawn. It is an open-air monument, not a tomb, marking the spot where her physical body was returned to the elements. It serves as a place of national homage, visited by foreign dignitaries and citizens alike to pay their respects to one of India's most powerful and controversial leaders. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990, the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century and the first woman to hold that office. Her political and economic policies, known as Thatcherism, reshaped the British nation. In her later years, Thatcher suffered from poor health, including several small strokes and advancing dementia, which led her to retire from public life. She passed away from a stroke on April 8, 2013 while staying at the Ritz Hotel in London. She was 87 years old. Thatcher received a ceremonial funeral, a grand affair with full military honors that included a procession through the streets of London to St. Paul's Cathedral. Following the funeral service, which was attended by Queen Elizabeth II and dignitaries from around the globe, her body was taken to Mortlake Crematorium in southwest London. In line with her wishes, her ashes were not scattered but were interred. Her final resting place is alongside her beloved husband, Sir Dennis Thatcher, at the Royal Hospital Chelsea in London. The site is marked by a simple but elegant headstone of dark granite, bearing her name in years. The Royal Hospital Chelsea is a home for retired soldiers, known as the Chelsea Pensioners, a British institution she deeply admired. Her choice reflects her profound patriotism and respect for the armed forces. Vladimir Lenin was a Russian revolutionary, politician, and political theorist. He was the founder of the Russian Communist Party, leader of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, and the first head of the Soviet state. His ideas formed the basis of Leninism, which became the dominant version of Marxism in Russia. Lenin's health began to fail after an assassination attempt in 1918. He suffered a series of debilitating strokes between 1922 and 1923 that left him severely incapacitated. He died on January 21, 1924, at his country estate in Gorky at the age of 53. The official cause of death was listed as cerebral arteriosclerosis, a hardening of the arteries in the brain despite Lenin's own wish to be buried next to his mother. The Soviet leadership, led by Joseph Stalin, decided to preserve his body for public display. They believed it would serve as a powerful symbol of the immortal nature of his revolutionary ideals. An elaborate embalming process was undertaken, and a temporary wooden mausoleum was quickly erected in Moscow's Red Square. This was replaced in 1930 by the current, more permanent structure. Lenin's mausoleum is a monumental pyramid of red granite and black labradorite. Inside, his body lies in state within a glass sarcophagus, maintained at a specific temperature and humidity. For generations of Soviet citizens, a visit to the tomb was a quasi-religious pilgrimage. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, his body remains on display, a potent and controversial relic of a bygone era. Joseph Stalin was the dictator of the Soviet Union for nearly 3 decades, from the mid-1920s until his death. He consolidated power after Lenin's death and transformed the Soviet Union into a global superpower. But through a brutal reign of terror that resulted in the deaths of millions, on the night of March 1, 1953, Stalin was found unconscious on the floor of his room at his Konsevo dacha outside Moscow. Having suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage, his guards were reportedly under orders not to disturb him, so he lay there for hours before being discovered. He lingered for 4 days before dying on March 5, 1953. Initially, Stalin was given the highest Soviet honor. His embalmed body was placed on display in Lenin's mausoleum in Red Square, which was officially renamed the Lenin and Stalin Mausoleum. For 8 years, the two leaders lay side by side. However, this changed during the period of de-Stalinization initiated by his successor Nikita Khrushchev. In 1961, Khrushchev condemned Stalin's personality cult and his crimes. Under the cover of darkness on October 31, 1961, Stalin's body was quietly removed from the mausoleum. He was reburied in the Kremlin Wall necropolis, a burial ground for notable Soviet figures located just behind the mausoleum. His final resting place is marked by a simple grave and a granite bust, a far more modest monument than his original place of honor, and a reflection of his complex and brutal legacy. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States, serving from 1861 to 1865. He successfully led the country through its greatest internal crisis, the American Civil War, preserving the Union and signing the Emancipation Proclamation, which led to the end of slavery just 5 days after the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Effectively ending the war, Lincoln was assassinated on the evening of April 14, 1865. He was attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., when he was shot in the back of the head by actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln was carried to a house across the street, where he died early the next morning. His death was followed by an extended period of national mourning. His body was carried by a funeral train on a nearly 1,700-mile journey back to his home state of Illinois, with millions of Americans lining the route to pay their respects. He was buried in Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois. His final resting place is the Lincoln Tomb, a magnificent granite monument topped by a 117-foot-tall obelisk. Inside the tomb is decorated with bronze statues and excerpts from his famous speeches. Lincoln is buried in a concrete vault 10 feet below the marble floor of the burial chamber, along with his wife Mary and 3 of their 4 sons. This extra security measure was taken in 1901 after a failed attempt to steal his body in 1876. John F. Kennedy, the 35th U.S. President, embodied the energy and optimism of a new generation. During his brief presidency, he confronted the Cold War's most perilous moments, launched the Peace Corps, and set the ambitious goal of landing a man on the moon. He inspired millions with his call to public service, famously urging Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. His presidency, often called Camelot, represented a moment of great hope and possibility. This promise was shattered on November 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. His death at age 46 was a profound national trauma. Following a solemn state funeral watched by a grieving world, Kennedy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The site, on a slope with a view of Washington, D.C., was chosen by his widow, Jacqueline Kennedy. At the head of the grave, she requested an eternal flame be placed as a symbol of his enduring legacy. Kennedy's grave is flanked by the graves of his wife and 2 of their children who died in infancy. The site is one of the most visited grave sites in the world, a place of pilgrimage where millions reflect on the life and premature death of a leader who inspired a generation. Nelson Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary and political leader who served as the first president of a fully democratic South Africa from 1994 to 1999. After spending 27 years in prison for his political activities, he emerged to lead his country away from apartheid, becoming a global icon of peace and reconciliation. In his later years, Mandela retired from public life and his health began to fail. He was hospitalized multiple times for a recurring lung infection, likely related to tuberculosis he contracted in prison. He passed away peacefully at his home in Johannesburg on December 5, 2013, surrounded by his family. He was 95 years old. His death was followed by 10 days of national mourning and a series of memorial services, including a large public service attended by nearly 100 world leaders. For his final resting place, Mandela returned home. He was buried on the family estate in his ancestral village of Kunu in the Eastern Cape Province, a place he often spoke of as the source of his happiest childhood memories. The burial itself was a private ceremony for about 450 family and friends, combining state military honors with traditional Xhosa customs. His grave is not a grand, public monument. Instead, it is a simple and dignified site in a family graveyard, marked by a stone bearing his name, dates, and his beloved clan name. Madiba. The choice reflects his humility and his deep, unbreakable bond with his roots. Winston Churchill was a British statesman, army officer, and writer who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945 during the Second World War, and again from 1951 to 1955. His defiant leadership and powerful speeches were crucial and inspiring. British resistance against Nazi Germany. In his final years, Churchill suffered from declining health, including a series of strokes. He suffered his last, and most severe, stroke. He died at his London home 9 days later, on January 24, 1965, at the age of 90. It was the 70th anniversary of his own father's death. By decree of Queen Elizabeth II, Churchill was granted a state funeral, an honor not bestowed on any non-royal figure since the 19th century. The funeral was a massive public event. After the service at St. Paul's Cathedral, his coffin was famously carried by barge up the River Thames as dockside cranes dipped in salute. From there, it was placed on a special train. However, Churchill had chosen not to be buried with other national heroes in London. Instead, he wished to be laid to rest in a simple country churchyard. He is buried in the family plot at St. Martin's Church in Blaydon, a small village near his birthplace Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. For a man of such global stature, his grave is remarkably understated, a simple, flat stone slab, inscribed with his name and dates. Franklin D. Roosevelt, often referred to by his initials FDR, was the 32nd President of the United States. He is the only president to have been elected 4 times, and he led the nation through 2 of its greatest crises, the Great Depression and World War II. Roosevelt's health, long affected by polio that left him unable to walk unaided, declined seriously during the war years. On the afternoon of April 12, 1940, while on vacation at his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia, he was sitting for a portrait when he suddenly complained of a terrible pain in the back of his head and slumped unconscious. He had suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage and died shortly thereafter. His death came less than a month before Germany's surrender, meaning he did not live to see the final victory he had worked so tirelessly to achieve. FDR had planned his own funeral and burial in meticulous detail. After a service at the White House, his body was transported by funeral train to his lifelong home, Springwood, in Hyde Park, New York, in accordance with his wishes. He was buried in the estate's rose garden, one of his favorite spots. His grave is marked by a monument of stark and powerful simplicity, just as he had designed it. It is a large, rectangular block of pure white imperial Danby marble. As per his explicit instructions, the monument is completely bare, with no names, no dates, and no inscriptions of any kind on its visible surfaces. His wife Eleanor was buried beside him after her death in 1962. The unadorned stone in the quiet garden serves as a humble yet profound final statement for one of America's most consequential presidents. Ronald Reagan, a former Hollywood actor and governor of California, served as the 40th President of the United States from 1981 to 1918. His presidency saw a significant shift in American politics, marked by conservative policies, tax cuts, and a strong anti-communist foreign policy. In 1994, 5 years after leaving office, Reagan announced in a handwritten letter to the American people that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He gradually withdrew from public life as the disease progressed. He died of pneumonia, complicated by Alzheimer's, at his home in Bel Air, California, on June 5, 2004. At the age of 93, he was honored with a state funeral in Washington, D.C., the first for a U.S. president since Lyndon B. Johnson. Afterward, his casket was flown back to California for interment at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum in Simi Valley. The burial site is located on a beautiful hilltop with panoramic views of the surrounding landscape. The grave itself is a large, black granite memorial, inscribed with a quote Reagan delivered at the dedication of the library. "I know in my heart that man is good, that what is right will always eventually triumph, and there is purpose and worth to each and every life." The site is a serene and powerful memorial, a centerpiece for the library that celebrates his life and career, and a popular destination for visitors paying their respects. Boris Yeltsin was a Soviet and Russian politician who became the first president of the Russian Federation. Serving from 1991 to 1990, he played a pivotal role in the dissolution of the Soviet Union and guided Russia through a tumultuous transition from communism to a market economy. Yeltsin had a long history of heart disease, which plagued him throughout his presidency. He underwent emergency quintuple bypass surgery in 1990. After his resignation, his health continued to decline. He died on April 23, 2007, in Moscow from congestive heart failure. His death was marked by a national day of mourning, uniquely for a modern Russian leader. He was given a religious funeral service at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. He was buried in the prestigious Novodevichy Cemetery, the resting place of many of Russia's most famous writers, artists, and political figures. Yeltsin's tomb is perhaps the most visually striking in the entire cemetery. It is not a traditional statue or headstone, but a large, abstract monument designed to look like a massive Russian tricolor flag, billowing as if in the wind. The flag is constructed from 3 different types of stone: white marble for the top stripe, blue Byzantine mosaic for the middle, and red porphyry for the bottom. The monument's modern and dynamic design is intended to symbolize Yeltsin's role in forging a new, post-Soviet Russia. Fidel Castro was a Cuban revolutionary and politician who led the Cuban Revolution and governed the Republic of Cuba as prime minister and then president for almost half a century. He transformed Cuba into a one-party socialist state and was a central figure in the Cold War. In 2006, Castro handed over his presidential duties to his brother Raul Castro. Due to a severe intestinal illness that required multiple surgeries, he made few public appearances in his final years. He died on the evening of November 25, 2016, at the age of 90. The cause of death was not officially announced, but was related to his long-standing health issues. Following his wishes, Castro was cremated. His ashes were then placed in a small cedar coffin and taken on a 4-day funeral procession across Cuba, reversing the route he took during his victory caravan after seizing power. The journey allowed millions of Cubans to pay their last respects. His final resting place is the Santa Efigenia Cemetery in Santiago de Cuba, the city where his revolution began. His tomb is profoundly simple yet powerful. His ashes are interred within a massive, gray, boulder-like monolith. The only marking on the stone is a small, dark green plaque inscribed with a single word in gold capital letters. The monument's raw, naturalistic form is meant to symbolize strength and permanence, a final, understated statement from a monumental figure. Hugo Chavez was the president of Venezuela from 1999 until his death in 2013, a controversial but highly popular figure among his supporters. He led a socialist movement he called the Bolivarian Revolution, which focused on social welfare programs and nationalizing key industries. In June 2011, Chavez announced that he was being treated for cancer. Over the next 2 years, he underwent 4 surgeries and numerous treatments, mostly in Cuba. Despite his illness, he won re-election in 2012 but was too sick to be sworn in. He died in a military hospital in Caracas on March 5, 2013. The official cause was a massive heart attack following respiratory failure. His death prompted a massive outpouring of grief from his supporters. Initially, the government announced that his body would be permanently embalmed and displayed in a glass casket. Much like Lenin, however, they later stated that the body had not been properly prepared in time for a successful preservation process. Instead, Hugo Chavez lies in a marble sarcophagus within the Cuartel de la Montana, or Barracks of the Mountain in Caracas. This location is deeply symbolic. It is the military barracks from which Chavez launched his failed coup attempt in 1992, the event that first brought him to national prominence. The site has been transformed into a political shrine, a mausoleum where his followers can pay homage to the leader of their revolution.